From Quito, Ecuador, my name is Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South, the evening news brief on Telesur English. We begin this new edition right now. Days after its general elections, Honduras remains without a president, even after a partial recount of some of the disputed ballots. The country awoke from another night of curfew after a day of massive protests against fraud on Sunday. A state of exception remains in force, which suspends many political and social guarantees. The electoral authorities finished their recount of just over 1,000 voting tallies in the early hours of the morning, leaving President Juan Orlando Hernández still ahead by about 1.6%, but they have not formally declared him the winner. Some social movements are calling for a general strike to defend what they see as the victory of the opposition candidate, Salvador Nasralla.
Yo no estoy convocando en este momento un paro nacional.
I'm not calling for a national strike. It's the people of Honduras who are suggesting that. First, we are going to exhaust every legal option to make President Juan Orlando Hernández understand the situation and make him leave the country. Nobody wants him. Only 20% of the population who receives salaries from Juan Orlando Hernández want him. Only 20% of the population who receives salaries from Juan Orlando Hernández want him. With all due respect, I can say he already stopped being president. If someone lives in a house with 10 people, and 8 of them don't want you there, what are you doing there, Juan Orlando? In this house, nobody wants you. Besides, he is working for the people of Honduras. The people of Honduras don't want you here.
Es un empleado y ya tu jefe, que se llama pueblo hondureño, no te quiere.
The former president and opposition leader, Manuel Zelaya, explained why they will only accept the results after a recount of all the 5,000 tallies they believe were manipulated.
We have asked to be given a list of those ballots only to make comparisons. And logically, if they are able to count 1,006 ballots, and they say they counted them in 8 hours, then they could also count these 5,179 ballots, which were introduced after Sunday's vote.
Let's take a look at those results given by the Electoral Authority after its recount. With 99.96% of the ballot boxes counted, President Hernández had 42.98%, while Salvador Nasralla of the center-left opposition alliance had 41.39%. A week ago, Nasralla had a lead of 5%. Demonstrations have taken place outside Honduran embassies in Nicaragua and El Salvador to support the opposition alliance party and its presidential candidate, Salvador Nasralla. They are protesting claims of electoral fraud and supporting Honduras' right to a transparent electoral process, calling on the people to defend their votes. They also ask for the support of other countries, not Orlando Hernández. Despite the suspension of guarantees, thousands of Hondurans took to the streets on Sunday to demand transparency from the Supreme Electoral Court. More in this report.
Thousands of opposition alliance supporters are on the streets of Tegucigalpa. They claim
President, we demand the real results. President Nasralla.
Even when the court talks about transparency, the supporters doubt the electoral authority. They're asking for a recount of the records.
They have to prove the truth. We want democracy in our country.
That flower means peace, and we are together on the same cause. And we disagree with the current government.
Murderers, murderers, that was the scream of protest by demonstrators as they faced security forces. Presidential candidate Salvador Nasralla confirmed here that he won the election by a vast majority.
I won with almost over 7 points.
The opposition alliance is asking for the review of 5,000 records, but the electoral court will inspect around 1,000.
Salvador won the elections. We have a new president.
Protesters called for the continuity of the protest, and they remarked it would be peaceful.
One of the most striking moments of Sunday's demonstration against fraud was when protesters put flowers on the shields of the riot police. Telesur's Adriana Sibori was there.
No doubt this is a big demonstration, as the opposition alliance supporters have walked almost 10 kilometers. They are denouncing electoral fraud and say their candidate, Salvador Nasrallah, is the winner of the presidential elections. The Supreme Electoral Tribunal said that the process has been completely transparent, despite the fact that Nasrallah remained ahead by 5 points during the first couple of days before the counting system went down for 5 hours. Suddenly, the results began to change, putting candidate and President Juan Orlando Hernandez ahead of the race. The demonstration reached the building where the votes are being counted, as the military and the police prevented people from advancing. Demonstrators are holding flowers to give to enforcement groups in an effort to maintain a peaceful protest. The Supreme Electoral Tribunal has said nobody is allowed to enter the building where the vote count is happening, as the opposition alliance continues to denounce an electoral fraud during the presidential elections. Representatives from the left-wing party did not attend today's vote counting.
That was Adriana Sibori from Honduras. In Cuba, the second round of elections for the delegates of popular municipal assemblies took place on Sunday. Let's look at more information on this report.
This is one of the over 3,000 Cuban polls where a second round to vote for the base delegate was necessary.
Technically, it is traditional that all participant municipalities have a second round to reach heterogeneity and for the voter to have more possibilities. We can identify that as democracy because all voters have the right to choose their own representatives for the government organizations on a municipal level. That's why this allows an opportunity for a more equal representation and also a majority of voters.
The Cuban electoral law says the second round can happen in those places in which none of the candidates got more than 50% of the valid votes.
They address a lot of our needs, and almost all the time we reach to them. Not always, but the delegate has solved a lot of things our community needs.
When the second round is finalized in these municipalities, the 12,515 elected delegates will take part of the 168 municipal assemblies in Cuba for 2.5 years.
The delegate is a key figure in a neighborhood because he or she can handle several things, attends different needs in the community, like an issue with a school, or a pharmacy, or the health side, a problem with the community services, like electricity, any issue that has to do with a neighbor. It should always be claimed through the delegate, of course, with the help of all parts of the communities, but it's all centered around the delegate.
General elections in Cuba are organized every 5 years and consist of 2 parts. In the second stage of the process, a date yet to be decided, deputies for the Popular National Assembly will be elected according to electoral law.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. President Nicolás Maduro has announced that Venezuela is creating a digital currency to combat the financial blockade imposed by the United States. Maduro said that the sanctions imposed by the U.S. have prevented U.S. citizens and companies from buying bonds from the Venezuelan oil state company PDVSA, creating economic and financing problems. Our correspondent Freddie Gillingham brings us more information.
So during his annual Christmas message yesterday, President Nicolás Maduro announced that he will be launching a new cryptocurrency. This is a measure which is an attempt to bypass the foreign-imposed economic sanctions on Venezuela and help it repay its foreign debt. Going by the name of Petro, the new cryptocurrency will be backed by Venezuela's vast oil, gas and diamond wealth. The country's opposition and some parts of the international media have already lambasted the idea, despite it even being launched. No set date has been given for when it will come into effect, but Maduro did announce yesterday that this is what his government are planning to do. Debt restructuring is an urgent high priority now for Maduro. It sits at around $120 billion. So this new measure, a lot is resting on it, and it may just have come at the right time.
That was Frederick Gillingham from Caracas. It's been 19 days since the disappearance of the Ara San Juan submarine in Argentina. So far, there has been no trace of the ship, which went missing while it operated in the San Jorge Gulf en route to the Mar del Plata naval station. Family members of the missing crew continue to ask for concrete answers. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires filed this report.
Days continue to mount since the disappearance of the Ara San Juan, after the Argentine Navy finally gave up the search for survivors from the 44-member crew. There has still been no trace of the submarine, which last made contact on November 15th.
Due to poor weather conditions, there are no updates from the search area of the missing Ara San Juan submarine. We now wait for the arrival of 3 mini-submarines with operational capacity 1,000 meters underwater, which will join to the 6 other vessels that are currently sweeping the ocean floor.
After the Navy ended rescue operations, family members of the crew asked for a concrete response from President Mauricio Macri, and they demanded that rescue operations for any survivors continue.
The search cannot stop. They must be found. They talk about who was responsible, about what mistakes were made, but we want their bodies. We want them to commit to continuing the search.
As family members anticipate their continued fight until the ship is found, and ask authorities not to abandon them, disapproval of the government's actions continues to increase.
We're showing solidarity to the families, but that has no relation to the government's policies, which are to make empty speeches and to throw blame around.
We stand with the family members who are suffering through a lack of support and truthful dialogue.
Over the past few days, there has been widespread criticism of the government's lack of communication. 55% of Argentinians have a negative opinion about how the disaster has been handled and question the sparse public appearances of government officials and of President Macri himself, who was late in sending a message of support to the families of the 44-member crew of the Ara San Juan.
The government chief negotiator with Colombia's ELN guerrilla, Juan Camilo Restrepo, has unexpectedly resigned 6 months after talks started in Quito, Ecuador. The chief negotiator says he wants to prioritize his business interests in the first quarter of next year and will leave at the beginning of January, around the time a ceasefire with the Marxist rebels ends. Bolivia has voted in judicial elections to choose the judges of the Constitutional Court. The elections come just after the country's top court allowed President Evo Morales to run for a 4th term. The nation celebrated its first judicial elections in 2011 after Congress, held by Morales' Mass Party, nominated candidates. At that time, the opposition called for blank protest votes, resulting in 42% of blank ballots. Opposition leaders are now making the same calls. In Ecuador, during the 7th País Alliance rally in Esmeraldas, former President Rafael Correa announced new political strategies to stand against what he calls an unconstitutional referendum. Correa has expressed his political differences with President Moreno and said he is analyzing the possibility of creating a new political party called Citizens' Revolution in order to continue the progressive socialist movement in Ecuador. In Mexico, it gets more difficult every day to even afford basic food items. This is a contrast to official numbers that paint a picture of a stable economy. Let's look at the details in the next report.
Rosalia walks through Jamaica Market in search for better prices. She needs to bring food home.
We used to say, what are we eating? And now we say, what can we afford?
Food is getting less affordable, even as the government has said that the national numbers prove that their economy is stable. Nevertheless, food and basic products are getting more unaffordable for those with less resources.
Pensions are the same since I retired until now. It's the same. It does not go up. And if it does, it's very minimal. Like 15 or 10 pesos. It's very minimal. That's why we have to lower our budgets to spend less.
People have been forced to spend less since the fuel prices were lowered.
It's a chain of raises, so this has affected people a lot. People don't buy that much like before. They used to come for a kilo. Now they buy half a kilo, and even a unit. It has been very noticeable.
Economists say that those who make 5 times under the minimum wage are unable to invest or to save.
All salaries are being lowered in real terms, and that means there's a loss of well-being and basic conditions for the majority of the population.
Better conditions are necessary to improve incomes, unlike the government's strategy of keeping low salaries to compete internationally with cheaper labor. The National Council for the Evaluation of Social Development Policies have determined that 41% of Mexicans can't afford the basic foods, even after the increase in the minimum wage of 40 cents a day.
In Guatemala, in the Reina Zone, Uspantán, the 4th community hydroelectric was built thanks to the group effort of hundreds of families that have lived without power for more than 40 years. Citizens say that they have achieved power autonomy with this project.
They are turbines of the new community hydroelectric opened in La Gloria village, in the Reina area, Uspatán, Quiche, that will benefit more than 100 families of the region.
We are inaugurating a great project that was a sacrifice for the community, but we are very happy to achieve this project that is now illuminating each one of the houses.
It is the 4th community hydroelectric that has opened in this area, which was driven by the collective work of inhabitants and strengthened with the support of non-governmental organizations.
What we have achieved with these projects are a great example of how the communities can have self-autonomy to have their own power, and that strengthens the togetherness of the community.
The families say that for 4 decades they have lived without power, and they applaud the project's completion. They say that they accomplished it with the hard work of the people.
What we did is support each other. There were women, men. If the husbands weren't there, the women helped out.
They emphasize that this work was designed without harming the environment, contrary to what is promoted by the state, that has been criticized for the strong environmental damage that they caused.
We took
10% of the river, 600 meters, and we returned it without any type of pollution, being careful that it doesn't impact the water.
This region operates a hydroelectric with state funds called Palo Viejo. They said, however, that after 4 years of operation, none of the affected communities have power.
In Peru, dozens of activists staged a mock bullfighting performance in Central Lima on Sunday to demand the end to bullfighting in the country. The demonstration was made to highlight the pain and suffering of bulls during such events. The locals clashed with the protesters as they reenacted a bullfight with a plastic bull and fake blood. The activists argued the bloody sport causes excessive suffering for the animals as bulls fight to death against matadors.
A bullfighter is the worst thing in our country. They are abhorrent, they are shameful, it is terrible. We, as defenders of animals, cannot allow this abuse in our country. We cannot allow them to continue mistreating animals.
Also in Peru, independent artists presented the Pacha es una sola madre exhibit, where through modern art, the damage caused to the Peruvian Amazon and its indigenous community is represented.
The exhibit starts with a video which depicts the deforestation and the pollution of natural resources in the Peruvian rainforest due to the legal and illegal resources extraction.
Between 2016 and 2017, there have been 15 oil spills. We want people to know that logging happens every day. and we want to help at some point those who have been affected.
Topographical pictures of areas affected by deforestation are displayed in the exhibit, as well as portraits, paintings of plants and birds, sculptures, and texture paintings. They all seek to leave an impression on visitors.
What you are looking at is an oil spill, and this is the way this river looks. It's blackened. Hopefully, this message will stay in the visitor's subconscious, creating awareness.
The gallery's hallways have been made to look the same as many indigenous communities affected by resource extractions do, where the people, even children, are victims of exploitation, hunger, and sickness, as described by Peru's Public Defender's Office.
Those women are chained before being transported so that they can escape, as if they were animals or merchandise. They're transported in chains, so you have to be careful. You may trip on a chain or you may be caught in one, right?
This is the first exhibit by the Sachar Collective, a group of independent artists who are preparing more exhibitions over the coming months about topics such as corruption, gender violence, exploitations, among others.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Spain's Supreme Court has ruled that the former Catalan vice president and 3 others should remain in prison. Our correspondent Vincent Montagut has the details from Madrid.
Hola, muy buenas tardes. Saludos a todos desde Madrid.
The Supreme Court here in Madrid has decided to keep in prison the sacked vice president of the Catalan government, Oriol Junqueras, the former interior minister, Joaquin Forn, and the 2 independence leaders, often known as the Geordies. The judge argued that although there was no longer a risk of flight, there was a risk of reoffending. And he said that was very serious in the case of these prisoners because he said they were directly linked to the acts of violence related to the crime of rebellion. However, 6 other members of the dismissed Catalan government are being freed on bail. That's been set at €100,000 each. The judge ordered that they appear every week before a magistrate's court. He confiscated their passports and banned them from leaving the country without permission from the courts. And also this morning in Brussels, the sacked Catalan president, Carles Puigdemont, along with 4 other ministers who are there with him, declared before the court, which is deciding whether or not they should be extradited to Spain. The judge said he would make his decision known on December the 14th. That, of course, is exactly 1 week before the Catalan regional elections. That's all we have for now.
Vincent Montagut from Madrid. Tension has increased sharply among Palestinians as reports circulate that President Donald Trump is about to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Our correspondent in Gaza, Nur Harasin, has more.
Palestinians here in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, and also in the Palestinian-occupied territories are angry after they heard the news this afternoon that the U.S. President Donald Trump is to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And here we are talking about east and the west of Jerusalem. At the same time, there were other news that Saudi Prince has asked the Palestinian president to recognize a town called Abu Dis, and it is near Jerusalem, as the capital of the Palestinian state. This is a very serious statement. It is not confirmed yet if it's true, if it's not. However, Palestinians were really angry hearing such news. Palestinian factions and also Palestinian youth groups here in Gaza have organized protests and set in a protest to be held tomorrow against such news.
From Gaza, Nur Harasin. And now let's take a look at some of the other stories that are happening around the world.
Police in Malta have arrested 10 suspects linked to the murder of anti-corruption journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia. 53-year-old anti-corruption journalist murdered in a car bomb October 16th last year. She had led the investigation into the Panama Papers and high-level political corruption cases. The United States and South Korea have begun their largest ever joint military drills amid North Korean warnings and tension. The flight training exercises come a week after North Korea said it had tested its most advanced ballistic missile and are scheduled to run until Friday. 6 F-22 Raptor stealth fighters and more than 230 aircraft are taking part. The Kremlin has said that Russian President Vladimir Putin was not influenced by former U.S. National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Putin had taken the decision to hold off retaliating independently and had not known of Flynn's alleged request to Russia to refrain from an immediate response. Flynn pleaded guilty on Friday to lying to the FBI about his contact with Russia. Environmental experts and NGOs have expressed alarm at the proposed expansion of Okinawa military base on the Japanese cultural monument and protected biodiverse site. The comments underline a legal victory in August when the U.S. Court of Appeals said conservationists could take the U.S. military to court to compel it to consider the full impacts of the new military base on the Japanese island. Cyclists gathered in the Kenyan capital Nairobi on Sunday to raise awareness of pollution ahead of the UN Environment Assembly taking place December 4th to 6th. The 3-day event will gather more than 100 environmental ministers from across the world. More than 7,000 delegates are expected to attend the assembly. An Australian politician proposed to his long-term partner on the floor of Parliament ahead of the expected historic passage of legislation allowing same-sex couples to marry. Liberal lawmaker Tim Wilson proposed to his partner, Ryan Bolger, having already exchanged rings but having pledged to wait for marriage equality in Australia before they wed. Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull welcomes the move.
This debate has been the soundtrack to our relationship. We both know this issue isn't the reason we got involved in politics. Give us tax reform any day. But in my first speech, I defined our bond by the ring that sits on both of our left hands, and that they are the answer to the questions we cannot ask. So there's only one thing left to do. Ryan Patrick Bolger, will you marry me? We'll put there.
Now the message today to every gay person in this nation is clear. We love you, we respect you. Your relationship is recognised by the Commonwealth as legitimate and honourable as anyone else's. You belong.
And now we've come to the end of this evening news brief. This and many other news, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And be sure to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.